Miles Sullivan, a man whose life revolved around the precise quantification of risk, stared at the claim file. It sat on his meticulously organized desk like a misplaced comma in a perfectly constructed sentence. The faint scent of stale coffee hung in the air, a testament to the late nights he'd been putting in lately. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, the familiar ache settling in. This case, however, was different. It wasn't the usual fender bender or exaggerated burglary. This was the sinking of the Oceanus, a luxury cruise liner, and the claim wasn't for lost luggage or a ruined vacation. It was for the potential total loss of the vessel, a payout that would make headlines. The official report cited a collision with a submerged reef near the Kerguelen Islands, a remote archipelago in the southern Indian Ocean. The ship, according to the narrative, sank rapidly. Most passengers and crew were rescued. Standard stuff, really? Except for one detail. One glaring, improbable detail that clung to Miles like the damp chill of the deep ocean. The claim highlighted the heroic act of a single wounded sailor who, amidst the chaos and terror of the sinking ship, supposedly saved a passenger, Elliot Mercer, from the churning waters. This sailor, according to the account provided by Mercer, pulled him from the unforgiving grip of the currents and secured him onto a piece of floating wreckage before disappearing into the waves. He was never seen again. The report painted a dramatic picture of selflessness and courage. The sailor, already injured, prioritized the safety of a passenger over his own survival. It was the stuff of maritime legend. The kind of story that would be retold in hushed tones in seaside taverns, inspiring awe and admiration. But Miles, a man trained to see through facades and dissect narratives, felt a prickle of unease. Something didn't add up. The sheer scale of the payout requested by the Oceanus owners, coupled with the vague and almost romanticized circumstances surrounding the sinking and the sailor's disappearance, set off alarms in Miles's mind. The insurance company, wary of the potential media fallout, had tasked him with a discreet but thorough investigation. They needed to be certain this wasn't a case of elaborate insurance fraud. Miles leaned back in his chair, the worn leather creaking beneath him. He picked up the phone and dialed his contact at the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center. He needed to verify the details of the rescue operation, cross-reference the survivor manifests, and confirm the reported weather conditions. The voice on the other end confirmed the broad strokes of the official narrative. Multiple distress calls, a large-scale rescue effort involving several vessels in the area, and the eventual confirmation of the Oceanus sinking. But when Miles asked about the heroic sailor, the voice on the other end hesitated. "There's no specific mention of that in the official logs, Mr. Sullivan. The rescue was chaotic, of course. Lots of individual acts of bravery. It's possible it simply wasn't documented." Miles pressed further, inquiring about any reports of injured crew members who hadn't been accounted for. Again, the response was vague. "We had several casualties, Mr. Sullivan. The exact numbers are still being confirmed. It's a complex situation." Miles thanked his contact and hung up, a knot tightening in his stomach. The lack of concrete information about the sailor, the central figure in the insurance claim, was deeply troubling. It was as if the man had simply materialized out of the chaos, performed his heroic act, and then vanished without a trace. This wasn't just unusual, it was practically impossible. He opened the file again, his eyes drawn to the attached statement from Elliot Mercer, the survivor supposedly rescued by the mysterious sailor. Mercer's account was detailed and emotional, describing the terror of the sinking ship, the icy grip of the water, and the sudden appearance of the sailor who, despite his own injuries, pulled Mercer to safety. The narrative was compelling, almost too compelling. Miles had interviewed countless individuals making insurance claims, and he developed a keen sense for detecting fabricated narratives. He looked for subtle inconsistencies, hesitations in speech, and the telltale signs of a rehearsed story. Mercer's statement, while emotionally charged, lacked the raw, visceral details one would expect from someone who had experienced such a traumatic event. It read more like a carefully crafted screenplay than a genuine account of survival. Miles reached for his coat. He needed to speak with Elliot Mercer in person. He needed to look him in the eyes, hear his voice, and judge for himself whether the man was a genuine survivor or a pawn in a much larger, more sinister game. The sinking of the Oceanus and the story of the wounded sailor was beginning to feel less like an accident and more like a carefully constructed illusion, and Miles was determined to unravel its secrets, no matter how deep they ran. Miles found Elliot Mercer residing in a quiet, upscale neighborhood, a stark contrast to the chaos and terror he'd supposedly endured. The house was modern, minimalist, almost sterile. Mercer himself, A man of medium build with a neatly trimmed beard and anxious eyes answered the door. He ushered Miles into a sparsely furnished living room. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The atmosphere was one of subdued tension. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Miles began, his voice calm and professional. "I understand this must be a difficult time for you." Mercer nodded, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Miles's shoulder. It has been. The memories, they're still very vivid." Miles opened his briefcase and retrieved a copy of Mercer's statement. "I've read your account of the sinking, Mr. Mercer. It's quite remarkable. Your description of the sailor who rescued you is particularly compelling." Mercer's eyes flickered, a brief flash of something Miles couldn't quite decipher. He was a hero. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him." "I understand. Could you perhaps tell me a little more about him? Anything you remember? His name, perhaps? His rank?" Mercer's hands, clasped tightly in his lap, began to tremble slightly. I don't remember his name. It was all so chaotic. The noise, the screaming. I was in shock. I just remember his face. He was young, and he was bleeding. Badly." Miles observed Mercer's demeanor, noting the subtle shift in his posture, the way his eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. He pressed gently. "You mentioned in your statement that he spoke to you. Do you recall what he said?" Mercer hesitated, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. He told me to hold on. That help was coming. That's all I remember." "And what about his injuries? You said he was bleeding. Do you recall where he was injured?" Mercer swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. I think it was his arm. Or maybe his shoulder. I can't be sure. It was dark. And the water?" His voice trailed off, his body trembling now. Miles leaned forward, his voice softening. "Mr. Mercer, I understand this is difficult, but it's crucial that we get all the details right. This sailor's actions were extraordinary. He deserves to be recognized. His family deserves to know what he did." Mercer's eyes finally met Miles's, a flicker of panic in their depths. He didn't have any family. He told me. He was alone." Miles paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Mr. Mercer, are you sure about that? No family at all? No friends? No one who would have known him?" Mercer shook his head vehemently. No one. He was just a sailor, doing his duty." Something about Mercer's response felt forced, rehearsed. The narrative, while emotionally charged, lacked the genuine rawness of a true traumatic experience. It was as if he was reciting lines from a script, carefully crafted to elicit sympathy and avoid revealing too much. Miles shifted his line of questioning. "You mentioned the chaos of the sinking. Can you describe the events leading up to your encounter with the sailor? Where were you when the ship struck the reef?" Mercer's gaze drifted back to the window, his voice becoming monotone. I was in the dining room, having dinner. Then there was this loud bang, and the ship started to tilt. People were screaming, running everywhere. I tried to get to a lifeboat, but it was too late." "Too late? What do you mean?" "The ship was listing badly. The lifeboats on that side were already gone. I slipped, fell into the water. I thought I was going to drown." Miles noticed that Mercer's account lacked specific details. He hadn't mentioned who he was dining with, what he was eating, or any other sensory details one might recall from such a dramatic event. It was as if he'd deliberately sanitized the memory, stripping it of any potentially revealing information. "And then the sailor appeared?" Miles prompted. Mercer nodded, his eyes still fixed on the window. "Yes, he just appeared. Out of nowhere. He grabbed me, pulled me onto a piece of, wreckage, and then he was gone." Miles closed his briefcase, the sound echoing in the quiet room. He stood up, towering over Mercer, who remained seated, his body tense. "Mr. Mercer, I appreciate your cooperation. I understand this is difficult, but it's important that we get to the truth of what happened that night." He extended his hand. Mercer hesitated for a moment before shaking it, his grip weak and clammy. As Miles turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that Elliot Mercer was hiding something. The survivor's tale, while compelling on the surface, was riddled with inconsistencies and evasions. The heroic sailor, the central figure in this unfolding drama, remained a phantom, a ghost in the machine. And Miles, with a growing sense of unease, knew he had only just begun to scratch the surface of this deeply unsettling mystery. Miles returned to his office, the unsettling encounter with Elliot Mercer replaying in his mind. The survivor's evasiveness, the carefully crafted narrative, the lack of concrete details, it all pointed towards a meticulously constructed facade. He sat at his desk, the claim file open before him, the image of the wounded sailor, a phantom of heroism, staring back at him. It was time to delve deeper, to penetrate the layers of obfuscation and uncover the truth about this enigmatic figure. He started with the ship's manifest, a comprehensive list of every passenger and crew member aboard the Oceanus at the time of its departure. He meticulously scrutinized the crew roster, searching for any mention of a sailor matching Mercer's vague description. He searched by name, by rank, by department, by physical characteristics, but nothing. There was no record of any sailor matching the profile of the supposed rescuer. Miles then contacted the Oceanus crewing agency, requesting access to their personnel records. He spent hours poring over files, cross-referencing names, dates of birth, and service histories. Again, nothing. No record of any sailor fitting the description. No mention of an injury sustained prior to the sinking, no next of kin information. It was as if the man had never existed. The mystery deepened. How could a person, a living, breathing human being, vanish so completely? How could there be no trace of him, no record of his existence beyond the carefully crafted narrative of a single survivor? Miles considered the possibility of a clerical error, a missing entry in the ship's records. It was possible but highly unlikely. These records were meticulously maintained, subject to strict regulations and audits. A missing crew member would be a significant oversight, one that would undoubtedly have been flagged. He then explored the possibility that the sailor was using an alias, a false identity. Perhaps he was a stowaway or someone working under an assumed name. He contacted Interpol, requesting assistance in cross-referencing the sailor's description with their database of missing persons and known criminals. Again, the search yielded nothing. The frustration gnawed at Miles. He felt like he was chasing a ghost, a phantom conjured from the depths of a carefully orchestrated deception. He reviewed Mercer's statement again, searching for any clue, any detail that might shed light on the sailor's identity. He focused on the description of the sailor's injuries, the bleeding wound that Mercer had mentioned. He contacted the medical teams involved in the rescue operation, inquiring about any reports of injured sailors matching the description. The responses he received were frustratingly consistent. There were several reports of injuries amongst the rescued crew, but none that matched the specific details provided by Mercer. No record of a sailor with a significant arm or shoulder injury, no mention of anyone requiring immediate medical attention for a bleeding wound. Miles leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The evidence, or rather the lack thereof, was becoming increasingly damning. The heroic sailor, the linchpin of Mercer's story, was a fabrication, a ghost conjured from the depths of a meticulously planned deception. But why? What was the purpose of inventing this heroic figure? What were they trying to hide? He returned to the initial claim, focusing on the sheer scale of the payout requested by the Oceanus owners. The amount was staggering, far exceeding the estimated value of the ship itself. It was almost as if they were trying to profit from the disaster. The thought sent a chill down Miles' spine. He began to suspect that the sinking of the Oceanus was no accident. That the entire event, including the story of the wounded sailor, was a carefully orchestrated scheme designed to defraud the insurance company. He envisioned a scenario where the ship was deliberately sunk, the heroic sailor narrative fabricated to distract from the true nature of the event, and the exorbitant insurance claim filed to reap a massive financial windfall. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but there were still gaps in his understanding. Who was behind this elaborate scheme? And what role did Elliot Mercer, the supposed survivor, play in this intricate web of deceit? He needed more evidence, more concrete proof to support his growing suspicions. He began to investigate the Oceanus ownership structure, tracing the complex network of shell corporations and offshore accounts that shielded the true beneficiaries of the insurance payout. He discovered that the cruise line was ultimately owned by a multinational conglomerate, a sprawling behemoth with a history of questionable business practices and a reputation for ruthlessly pursuing its own interests. He delved into the conglomerate's financial records, searching for any anomalies, any unusual transactions that might indicate a motive for the sinking. He discovered that the company had been facing significant financial difficulties in the months leading up to the Oceanus disaster. Their stock price had plummeted, their debt had ballooned, and they were facing increasing pressure from investors. A massive insurance payout would be a significant lifeline, a way to stave off financial ruin. The motive was becoming clear, but Miles still needed evidence to connect the conglomerate to the sinking itself. He shifted his focus to the official reports of the disaster, scrutinizing the details of the rescue operation, the location of the wreckage, and the reported weather conditions. He discovered discrepancies, subtle inconsistencies that hinted at something more sinister than a simple accident. The location of the wreckage, according to the official reports, was inconsistent with the prevailing currents and wind patterns in the area. It appeared as if the ship had drifted further than it should have, suggesting that it might have been intentionally scuttled. He also uncovered reports of unusual naval activity in the vicinity of the sinking around the time of the disaster. Several warships, their identities obscured, had been reported in the area, their presence unexplained. The picture was becoming increasingly clear. The sinking of the Oceanus was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated event, a deliberate act of sabotage designed to defraud the insurance company and provide a much-needed financial lifeline to a struggling conglomerate. The heroic sailor narrative, a masterful stroke of deception, was crafted to distract from the true nature of the event, a tragic footnote in a complex conspiracy. And Elliot Mercer, the supposed survivor, was a pawn in this elaborate game, a carefully chosen actor playing a predetermined role. Miles felt a surge of adrenaline. He was close, tantalizingly close to uncovering the truth. But he also knew that he was treading on dangerous ground. He was challenging powerful players, individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. He had stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple insurance fraud, and the stakes, he realized, had just gotten significantly higher. Miles felt the weight of the unfolding conspiracy settle upon him like the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. He had uncovered a motive, a desperate corporation on the brink of financial ruin, seeking a massive insurance payout. He had identified discrepancies in the official reports, hinting at a deliberate act of sabotage. The heroic sailor narrative, once a compelling tale of selflessness, now stood exposed as a carefully constructed smokescreen. But he needed more. He needed irrefutable proof. He decided to focus on the reported location of the wreckage. The official reports placed the Oceanus on the seabed near a charted reef, its position marked by sonar buoys deployed by the rescue vessels. But something about the reported location nagged at Miles. It didn't seem right. He pulled up detailed charts of the Kerguelen Islands, focusing on the area where the Oceanus supposedly sank. He overlaid the reported wreckage location onto the chart, then factored in the prevailing currents and wind conditions at the time of the sinking. The results were unsettling. Based on his calculations, the wreckage should have drifted further south, carried by the strong Antarctic circumpolar current. The charted location was too far north, almost as if the ship had been deliberately placed there. He contacted a marine salvage expert, an old acquaintance from a previous investigation. He shared his concerns about the wreckage location and requested an independent analysis of the drift patterns. The expert, after reviewing the data, confirmed Miles's suspicions. "The reported location is anomalous, Miles," he said. "Given the prevailing currents, the wreckage should be at least 20 nautical miles further south. It's as if someone towed it there." The notion of a staged sinking, already a disturbing possibility, now solidified into a chilling certainty. The Oceanus hadn't simply struck a reef. It had been deliberately sunk, its final resting place carefully chosen to fit the fabricated narrative. Miles delved further into the reports of unusual naval activity in the area. He discovered that the warships reported near the Kerguelen Islands at the time of the sinking weren't part of any scheduled exercises or patrols. Their presence was unexplained, their identities obscured by classified designations. He contacted a source within the naval intelligence community, a former colleague who owed him a favor. He shared his findings, cautiously probing for any information about the unidentified warships. His source, after some initial reluctance, confirmed that the ships were indeed operating under a cloak of secrecy. "It was a classified operation, Miles," he said, his voice low and guarded. "I can't tell you much, but it involved the recovery of sensitive material." "Sensitive material?" Miles pressed. "What kind of material?" His source hesitated. "I can't say. It's classified. But I can tell you this, it was important. Important enough to warrant the involvement of certain parties." The cryptic response sent a shiver down Miles's spine. He sensed he was on the verge of uncovering something truly significant, something far more complex and dangerous than he had initially imagined. The sinking of the Oceanus, the fabricated narrative of the heroic sailor, the unexplained presence of warships, it was all connected, all part of a larger, more sinister operation. He returned to the conglomerate's financial records, focusing on their recent acquisitions and investments. He discovered that they had recently invested heavily in a cutting-edge technology company specializing in underwater robotics and deep-sea exploration. He dug deeper, researching the company's projects and patents. He discovered that they were developing a revolutionary new type of underwater drone, capable of operating at extreme depths and carrying sensitive payloads. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The Oceanus hadn't simply been sunk. It had been used as a clandestine transport vessel for this experimental technology. The sinking, disguised as an accident, was a cover for the retrieval of the sensitive cargo. The warships, operating under a veil of secrecy, were tasked with recovering the drones from the sunken vessel. The heroic sailor narrative, a brilliant piece of misdirection, was designed to distract attention from the true nature of the operation. Miles felt a surge of both excitement and trepidation. He had uncovered the truth, or at least a significant portion of it. He had exposed a complex conspiracy involving corporate greed, government secrecy, and a carefully orchestrated deception that had cost hundreds of lives. But he knew that exposing this truth would not be easy. He was challenging powerful interests, individuals who wielded immense influence and would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. He gathered his findings, compiling a detailed report outlining the evidence he had uncovered. He included the discrepancies in the wreckage location, the reports of unusual naval activity, the conglomerate's financial troubles, their investment in the underwater drone technology, and the carefully crafted narrative of the heroic sailor. It was a damning indictment, a meticulously documented exposé of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. He knew that releasing this information would have significant consequences. He would be putting himself in considerable danger, risking his career and possibly even his life. But he couldn't ignore what he had uncovered. He couldn't stand idly by while a powerful corporation and its government collaborators escaped accountability for their actions. He had a responsibility, a moral obligation to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He saved the report, encrypting it with multiple layers of security. He then made a copy, storing it on a secure off-site server. He knew he was taking a significant risk, but he was prepared to face the consequences. He had uncovered the truth, and he was determined to bring it to light, even if it meant facing the wrath of those who lurked in the shadows, those who controlled the narrative, those who sought to keep the secrets of the deep ocean hidden forever. Miles leaned back in his chair, the worn leather groaning softly beneath his weight. The office, usually a sanctuary of order and quiet contemplation, felt stifling, the air thick with the weight of his discoveries. He had pieced together a compelling narrative, a chilling tale of corporate greed and calculated deception. The sinking of the Oceanus, the heroic sailor, Elliot Mercer's carefully rehearsed testimony, they were all components of a meticulously crafted illusion, designed to conceal a much darker truth. He knew that the cruise line, ostensibly a standalone entity, was ultimately controlled by a multinational conglomerate, a sprawling behemoth known as Omnitech. Omnitech's tentacles reached into countless industries, from shipping and logistics to advanced technologies and pharmaceuticals. Its reputation, whispered in hushed tones within the financial world, was one of ruthless efficiency and a willingness to operate in the gray areas of legality. Miles's initial research had focused on the financial aspects of the Oceanus sinking, the exorbitant insurance claim that seemed designed to capitalize on tragedy. Now, he turned his attention to Omnitech itself, seeking to understand the corporation's motivations, its potential gains from the disaster. He started by digging into Omnitech's public filings, the carefully curated narratives presented to investors and regulators. He sifted through annual reports, quarterly earnings statements, and press releases, searching for any anomalies, any hints of the underlying currents that might have driven the corporation to such drastic measures. The filings, predictably, painted a picture of robust financial health, of steady growth and expanding markets. But Miles, trained to see beyond the polished veneer of corporate pronouncements, noticed subtle discrepancies, hints of financial strain beneath the surface. He observed a gradual decline in profitability, a steady increase in debt, and a series of recent divestitures that suggested a company struggling to maintain its grip on its sprawling empire. He delved deeper, accessing specialized financial databases that provided a more granular view of Omnitech's financial performance. He scrutinized cash flow statements, debt schedules, and investment reports, searching for the telltale signs of a company in distress. He discovered that Omnitech's debt load had ballooned in recent years, fueled by a series of ambitious and ultimately unsuccessful acquisitions. The company was facing increasing pressure from creditors, its stock price plummeting amidst rumors of impending financial collapse. A massive insurance payout, Miles realized, would be a lifeline for Omnitech, a much-needed infusion of cash that could stave off financial ruin. The sinking of the Oceanus, tragic as it was, presented an opportunity, a chance to convert a catastrophic loss into a substantial financial gain. But the sheer scale of the insurance claim, far exceeding the actual value of the Oceanus, suggested something more than a simple attempt to recoup losses. It hinted at a deliberate attempt to profit from the disaster, to extract maximum value from the tragedy. Miles shifted his focus, looking beyond the financial motivations. He began to investigate Omnitech's subsidiaries, the sprawling network of companies that operated under its umbrella. He focused on those involved in shipping, logistics, and maritime operations, searching for any connections to the Oceanus and its ill-fated voyage. He discovered that one of Omnitech's subsidiaries, a discreetly named shipping company called Maritime Solutions, had been responsible for transporting a series of classified cargo containers aboard the Oceanus. The contents of these containers were listed as proprietary equipment, their destination undisclosed. Miles's instinct screamed foul play. He contacted his source within the naval intelligence community, the same individual who had provided information about the unexplained presence of warships near the Kerguelen Islands. He shared his findings, cautiously probing for any information about the classified cargo. His source, after a period of silence, confirmed that the containers held highly sensitive experimental technology, developed by another Omnitech subsidiary specializing in advanced robotics and underwater systems. The technology, he revealed, was of significant strategic importance, its details shrouded in secrecy. It was a prototype deep-sea exploration system, the source explained, his voice low and guarded. A new type of autonomous underwater vehicle, capable of operating at extreme depths and carrying specialized payloads. Specialized payloads? Miles pressed. What kind of payloads? The source hesitated. I can't say. It's classified. But let's just say it had the potential to disrupt the existing balance of power. The cryptic response sent a chill down Miles's spine. He realized that the sinking of the Oceanus wasn't just about insurance fraud, it was about something far more significant, something with potentially global implications. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Omnitech, facing financial ruin, had used the Oceanus to transport its experimental technology, likely to a clandestine testing facility or a secure storage location. The sinking, staged to appear accidental, provided a cover for the retrieval of the sensitive cargo by the waiting warships. The heroic sailor narrative, a brilliant piece of misdirection, served to distract attention from the true nature of the operation. And Elliot Mercer, the supposed survivor, was a carefully chosen pawn, his testimony designed to reinforce the fabricated narrative. Miles felt a surge of adrenaline, the thrill of discovery mingled with a growing sense of unease. He had uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate and government power, a conspiracy that had cost hundreds of lives and involved technology with the potential to reshape the global landscape. He knew that exposing this truth would be incredibly dangerous, but he also knew he couldn't remain silent. He had a responsibility to bring this story to light, no matter the consequences. Miles felt the invisible hand of power tighten around him, a subtle but unmistakable pressure designed to dissuade him from pursuing the truth. It started with anonymous phone calls, the silence on the other end broken only by the faint hiss of static, a chilling reminder that he was being watched. Then came the veiled threats, delivered through intermediaries, carefully worded messages suggesting that he was treading on dangerous ground, that his investigation was unwelcome, that he should consider the potential consequences of his actions. He found his office ransacked one morning, files strewn across the floor, drawers pulled open, their contents rifled through with a methodical thoroughness that spoke of professional expertise. Nothing of value was taken, nothing overtly damaged. It was a clear message, a demonstration of power, a warning to back down. Then came the subtle acts of intimidation, the near misses on his commute, the sudden appearance of unmarked cars parked outside his apartment building, the feeling of being followed, of being constantly observed. The pressure was relentless, insidious, designed to erode his resolve, to chip away at his confidence, to instill a sense of fear and paranoia. He found himself second-guessing his every move, scrutinizing every interaction, questioning the motives of everyone around him. His sleep became fragmented, punctuated by nightmares of sinking ships and shadowy figures lurking in the depths. He started to see threats where none existed, his mind playing tricks on him, his senses heightened to a state of near-constant anxiety. He confided in a trusted colleague, a seasoned investigator who had seen his share of corporate malfeasance and government cover-ups. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miles," his colleague warned, his voice grave. "These people are powerful. They have resources you can't even imagine. They'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Miles nodded, the weight of his colleague's words settling upon him. He knew the risks, but he couldn't turn back. He had uncovered a truth too significant to ignore, a conspiracy too far-reaching to let slide. He doubled down on his security measures, installing additional locks on his apartment door, varying his commute routes, and using encrypted communication channels for all sensitive conversations. He became a ghost in his own life, moving through the world with a heightened sense of awareness, constantly scanning his surroundings for any sign of danger. The pressure, however, continued to mount. He received a cryptic message, delivered through an anonymous email account, containing a single photograph. It was a picture of his daughter, Emily, playing in the park near their apartment. There was no accompanying text, no explicit threat, just the image, a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of those he loved. The message was a clear escalation, a crossing of a line that sent a wave of fear coursing through Miles's veins. He had been prepared to face the consequences of his investigation, to endure the threats and intimidation directed at him. But the thought of his daughter becoming a target, of her safety being jeopardized, was unbearable. He considered backing down, abandoning his investigation, protecting his daughter at all costs. But the thought of letting these powerful players escape accountability, of allowing them to continue their clandestine operations with impunity, filled him with a sense of profound unease. He knew he couldn't give in to fear. He couldn't let them win. He had to fight back, to expose the truth not just for himself, but for all those who had been affected by the sinking of the Oceanus, for all those whose lives had been sacrificed in the pursuit of corporate greed and government secrecy. He contacted his source within the naval intelligence community, sharing the photograph of his daughter and the escalating threats. His source, clearly disturbed by the implications, offered to provide additional protection, to ensure Emily's safety. "Don't worry, Miles," he assured him. "We'll take care of her. We won't let anything happen to her." Miles felt a flicker of hope, a renewed sense of resolve. He knew he wasn't alone in this fight. He had allies, individuals who understood the stakes, who were willing to risk their own safety to help him expose the truth. He continued his investigation, working tirelessly to gather more evidence, to solidify his case against Omnitech and its government collaborators. He knew he was walking a tightrope, balancing his pursuit of justice against the safety of his daughter. The pressure was immense, but he was determined to persevere, to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. He owed it to the victims of the Oceanus, he owed it to himself, and he owed it to his daughter, to create a world where truth and justice prevailed, even in the face of overwhelming power. Miles arranged to meet Elliot Mercer at a quiet cafe, a neutral space far from the sterile confines of Mercer's modern home. The midday sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the swirling steam rising from Miles's cup of coffee. Mercer arrived precisely on time, his usual meticulous attire slightly rumpled, his eyes shadowed with a new layer of anxiety. He sat down opposite Miles, his gaze darting nervously around the cafe, as if expecting to be recognized or worse, intercepted. He avoided Miles's gaze, his hands fidgeting with the napkin in his lap. The carefully constructed facade of composure he had maintained during their previous encounter seemed to be crumbling. "Mr. Mercer," Miles began, his voice calm but firm, "I need to talk to you about some inconsistencies I've discovered in your account of the Oceanus sinking." Mercer's eyes flickered up, a flash of fear in their depths. "Inconsistencies? I don't understand." Miles leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "The sailor, Mr. Mercer. The one who supposedly rescued you. He doesn't exist." Mercer's face paled, his hands clenching into fists. That's not true. He was real. I saw him. He saved my life." "There's no record of him, Mr. Mercer. Not on the ship's manifest, not in the crew records, not anywhere. It's as if he never existed." Mercer's eyes darted around the cafe again, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his lips trembling. Miles pressed on, laying out the evidence he had gathered, the discrepancies in the wreckage location, the reports of unusual naval activity, Omnitech's financial woes, and their investment in the experimental underwater drone technology. He painted a picture of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy, a deliberate act of sabotage designed to conceal a clandestine operation. "The Oceanus wasn't just sunk, Mr. Mercer," Miles said, his voice hardening. "It was sacrificed. And the story of the heroic sailor, your story, was a fabrication, a carefully crafted lie designed to distract from the truth. Mercer's carefully constructed facade finally shattered. His shoulders slumped, his eyes welling with tears. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with suppressed sobs. "It's true," he whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. "It was all a lie." Miles watched him for a moment, a mixture of pity and anger swirling within him. He had expected denial, perhaps even defiance. But this raw, unfiltered display of emotion caught him off guard. "Why, Mr. Mercer?" he asked softly. "Why did you agree to be a part of this?" Mercer lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with despair. They paid me. A lot of money. Enough to start over. To disappear." "Disappear? From what?" "From my debts," Mercer confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. I was in trouble. Gambling debts. They threatened me. Said they'd hurt my family if I didn't cooperate." Miles felt a pang of sympathy for the man, a pawn caught in a game far larger than himself. But he also knew that Mercer's desperation didn't excuse his complicity in this elaborate deception. "And the sailor?" Miles asked. "Who was he?" Mercer hesitated, his eyes flickering nervously. He was a professional. Hired by Omnitech. His job was to make sure I survived. To get me off the ship and disappear." "Disappear?" Miles repeated, a chill running down his spine. "What do you mean, disappear?" Mercer swallowed hard, his voice trembling. I don't know. They didn't tell me. They just said he would vanish. That no one would ever find him." Miles's mind raced, piecing together the implications of Mercer's confession. The heroic sailor, the central figure in this carefully constructed narrative, wasn't just a fabrication. He was a disposable asset, a loose end that needed to be eliminated. "Did you know his name?" Miles asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Mercer shook his head. "No, they never told me. He was just the operative. That's what they called him." Miles leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation settling upon him. The sailor, the supposed hero, hadn't disappeared into the waves. He had been deliberately silenced, his heroic act a tragic irony, a carefully crafted deception that ultimately led to his own demise. The 5 warships hadn't escorted him to port. They had retrieved the sensitive cargo, their presence a carefully orchestrated cover for a clandestine operation. The wounded sailor, having played his part, had become a liability, a loose end that needed to be tied up. Miles looked at Mercer, the man's face a mask of despair and regret. He felt a flicker of pity but also a surge of anger. Mercer, driven by his own desperation, had become a willing participant in this elaborate charade, a cog in the machine that had crushed the life of an unnamed, unknown sailor. He had his confession, another piece of the puzzle, further confirmation of the conspiracy he had uncovered. But the price of that confirmation, the realization that a man had been sacrificed to protect the secrets of the deep, left a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew he couldn't stop now. He had to expose the truth not just for himself, but for the ghost of the wounded sailor, the unsung hero whose act of supposed bravery had become his own epitaph. Miles sat in his car, the engine idling, the cafe receding in his rearview mirror. Elliot Mercer's confession echoed in his mind, a chilling testament to the depths of Omnitech's depravity. The wounded sailor, a phantom of heroism, had been nothing more than a disposable asset, a carefully chosen operative tasked with ensuring Mercer's survival and then disappearing, erased from the narrative as if he had never existed. The image of the 5 warships, their presence initially attributed to a rescue operation, now took on a sinister new meaning. They weren't escorting the wounded sailor to port. They were retrieving the sensitive cargo salvaged from the intentionally sunk Oceanus. The rescue operation, the heroic narrative, the carefully crafted media coverage, it was all a staged event, a meticulously choreographed performance designed to provide cover for the retrieval of Omnitech's experimental technology. The wounded sailor, having fulfilled his role, was eliminated, his silence ensured, his act of supposed bravery transformed into a tragically ironic footnote in a complex conspiracy. Miles felt a surge of anger, a burning desire to expose the truth, to bring Omnitech and its collaborators to justice. But he also knew the risks. He was challenging powerful players, individuals who wielded immense influence and controlled vast resources. He had already felt the subtle pressure of their disapproval, the veiled threats, the unsettling acts of intimidation. He knew that exposing the truth would put him in considerable danger, but he couldn't turn back. He couldn't let the sacrifice of the wounded sailor, the manipulation of Elliot Mercer, and the loss of hundreds of innocent lives go unanswered. He drove to his office, the familiar route taking on a new sense of foreboding. He parked his car in the underground garage, the dim lighting casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance and writhe around him. He walked to the elevator, his hand hovering over the call button, a sudden prickle of unease running down his spine. He had the unsettling feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking his every move. He entered his office, the space feeling strangely sterile, as if it had been recently sanitized, scrubbed clean of any trace of his presence. He sat at his desk, the encrypted report he had compiled staring back at him, a testament to the weeks of painstaking investigation, the countless hours spent piecing together the fragments of truth. He knew that releasing this information would have significant repercussions. It would expose Omnitech's criminal activities, trigger a wave of investigations and lawsuits, and potentially bring down the entire corporation. It would also expose the complicity of powerful individuals within the government, those who had facilitated the clandestine operation, those who had turned a blind eye to the sacrifice of innocent lives. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He considered the risks, the potential consequences for himself and his daughter. But he also considered the moral imperative, the responsibility he felt to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had already sent encrypted copies of the report to several trusted journalists, individuals with a proven track record of investigative reporting and a reputation for unflinching integrity. He had also contacted a whistleblower protection organization, ensuring that he and his daughter would have legal representation and security should the need arise. He typed a brief message to his contacts, informing them that the report was ready, that the time had come to bring the truth to light. He hit send, the electronic missive disappearing into the digital ether, carrying with it the potential to unravel a carefully constructed conspiracy, to expose the dark secrets of the deep ocean, and to bring justice to the victims of the Oceanus and the forgotten hero who had saved Elliot Mercer from the reef, only to be swallowed by the very forces he served. He knew he had just ignited a firestorm and he was ready to face the inferno. In the days that followed, the story of the Oceanus sinking exploded across the media landscape. The initial reports of a tragic accident were quickly replaced by accusations of corporate sabotage, government cover-ups, and a carefully orchestrated conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. The heroic narrative of the wounded sailor, once celebrated as a testament to human courage, was now dissected and deconstructed, revealed to be a cynical fabrication designed to distract from the true nature of the event. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Omnitech's stock price plummeted, its reputation tarnished beyond repair. Government investigations were launched, congressional hearings convened, and lawsuits filed by the families of the victims. The world watched in disbelief as the carefully constructed facade of corporate respectability crumbled, revealing the dark underbelly of greed, corruption, and callous disregard for human life. Miles, now under the protection of the whistleblower organization, watched the unfolding events with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. He had achieved his goal, exposing the truth and bringing those responsible to account. But he also knew that he had made powerful enemies, individuals who would never forgive him for uncovering their secrets. He lived under a constant shadow of threat, his movements monitored, his communications intercepted, his life transformed into a carefully choreographed dance of evasion and concealment. He knew that he would never be truly safe, that the long reach of Omnitech and its collaborators would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to exact their revenge. But he had no regrets. He had done what he believed was right, what he knew he had to do. He had exposed the truth, no matter the cost, and in doing so, he had honored the memory of the wounded sailor, the forgotten hero whose sacrifice had illuminated the dark depths of corporate greed and government deceit. The sailor's name remained unknown, his face a blur in the chaos of the sinking ship, but his act, however manipulated and ultimately tragic, had sparked a fire that had consumed the carefully constructed lies and brought the truth to the surface. And that, Miles knew, was a legacy worth fighting for.